Hey, it's Art. Welcome back to the channel. As you can tell by the title of this video, I'm going to be discussing a neat little music production technique I like utilizing that I call pumping reverb. Now, before we get into pumping reverb and the digital audio workstation, I quickly want to go over the general direction I'll be taking with this channel, at least over the next few months. I'm going to be focusing more on getting my videos a lot shorter and a lot more condensed in terms of the information. I have a lot of long form content, 30+ minute videos that take a lot of my time to make and a lot of your time to actually watch and get all of the information from. So I'm going to be doing my best to make my videos shorter and more succinct in terms of the information to help both of us out. So I hope that you appreciate that and come along for the ride here on the My New Microphone YouTube channel. So with that out of the way, let's hop into the digital audio workstation and have a look at what pumping reverb is and how we can utilize it in our music production efforts. All right, here we are inside of Logic Pro. Now, pumping reverb, as the name would suggest, combines reverb of some sort with some sort of pumping effect. As we'll see momentarily, this can be sidechain compression, it can be tremolo, it can be trance gating, it can even be automation or other effects. Anything to give a little bit of pumping to the amplitude of that reverb. Now, reverb as an audio effect, by definition, is designed to emulate the sound of real reflections and echoes of real sonic spaces. Of course, there are reverbs that are very otherworldly and give us so-called spaces that are actually unachievable in real life, but typically reverb is aimed at recreating the sound of reverberance, and in doing so helps us to get a sense of depth, width, and overall dimensionality in our mixes. Now, pumping reverb as a music production technique is a great way to add a rhythmic element to such reverbs, and in turn helps to add interest to our instruments and also movement and overall dynamics to the mix itself. It can also help us to minimize the washout that often happens with reverb, as the reverb tails add a little bit too much frequency masking over the dry tracks of our mix, and we lose definition along the way. And so anything we can do to sort of get reverbs out of the way of the dry elements whenever they're present is sometimes a good idea in mixing, and pumping reverb is a great way to achieve just that. So pumping reverb is one of the many music production techniques I talk about in my music production techniques PDFs. You can download those for free. It will be the first link in the description box down below. Over these 5 PDFs, I discuss my 100 favorite music production techniques, and I think that it will be a valuable resource for you if you're interested. Again, first link in the description box down below. So let's get into actually setting up pumping reverb in our sessions. And so right here, I have this basic E-piano stock in Logic. Here is something that I just programmed quickly. You can hear that it is very robotic. There's a little bit of a swing to it, but you see here that everything is otherwise very quantized and all of these velocities are the same. So it's going to sound pretty robotic, pretty stale, but here we go. So that is the loop we are working with for this demonstration. I'm going to open up this mixer again, drag this up, and we see that the E-piano, I will send it now to bus 1. So I'm sending it to an auxiliary track. That's the best way to set up reverbs. And then on this auxiliary track right here, bus 1, I have the stock convolution reverb from Logic called Space Designer. I have a 1.8 seconds large and bright plate. And now we can listen to this same E-piano being played through reverb. I'll just make sure that I have this unmuted. We can dial in these settings to get the exact reverb we want. So again, reverb helps to give us that sense of space. There's a little bit of washout. I'm going to purposefully make this reverb a little bit longer just for the sake of this demonstration. So let's have a quick listen to this. So there's a nice tail there, a 1.84 second tail. You'll notice that I have the dry all the way down. This is an effects return, and the wet up. And so that takes care of the reverb part of the pumping reverb effect. And now we have to get into a way to pump this reverb. And so the perhaps most basic way of doing this is to set up sidechain compression. And so you'll see here that directly after the Space Designer, which I will leave here in the corner for the rest of the video, or at least the rest of this demonstration, I can open up this compressor. And you'll see that I have a sidechain option right here. And I have this kick drum that is at every quarter note. Without the compressor, this is what this sounds like. I can actually use that quarter note kick drum to trigger this compressor right here. And again, this compressor is going to act after the reverb, and so it's going to effectively reduce the gain of the reverb according to the kick sample right here. I do have a video going into deeper detail about sidechain compression. I'll leave that in the description box down below as well. But let's have a listen to the pumping via sidechain compression here according to this kick drum. I can adjust the attack and release times to get more or less pump. I can also adjust the threshold as well, even the ratio. Ratio, get more compression. Very subtle. A little less subtle. And you'll notice here that if I bring down the threshold too far, I'll effectively get a situation where the compressor will effectively be applying a static gain change because this needle will never reach back up to 0. And so we will effectively be applying a set amount of gain reduction and then pumping from that. And so that's what this could look like. So we're basically just turning it down and applying the same amount of pumping as we could right here. So if we wanted deeper pumping, I would suggest actually putting another sidechain compressor in series. Again, sidechain compressor is set to the kick drum. And this serial sidechain compression is a great way to get deeper pumping, not only in our reverbs, but in anything we want to do in the mix. So that is one way to achieve pumping reverb. And one more thing I should note is that this kick drum doesn't even have to be sent to the output of the mix. We can actually utilize a ghost sidechain signal. I will set the output of the kick drum to be no output, so it's not actually being sent to the stereo out or the mix bus. And now we have a situation where there's no kick, but the signal is still going to be triggering these compressors right here. If we solo just the reverb, so that is the first way to get pumping reverb. Now the next way I want to talk about as I close down these compressors is tremolo. So tremolo is a basic amplitude modulation effect. See, I have the rate set to quarter notes, just like these kick drums right here. You can see the depth is at 100, smoothing is at 0. And so in the stock tremolo plugin of Logic Pro, there's not a whole lot I can do in terms of flexibility, but this is what tremolo could sound like in order to get pumping out of the reverb. So we see a little bit, we hear a little bit, without, with, and I can stack these in series again to get more pumping. The next strategy we have is actually utilizing a trance gate. So this is not a stock plugin from Logic, but it is a free third-party plugin. It is the Kilohertz trance gate. I'll leave a link to this as well as all of the other third-party plugins I'll be talking about in this video in the description box down below. What a trance gate effectively does is it either allows signal to pass or it mutes that signal. And so things can get a little bit choppy if we have the mix all the way up. You see that I only have 2 steps in this trance gate. We can make more if we wanted to, but I want it at 2 so that it's just on and off, more rhythmic, but you could get more complex if you wanted to. And then the resolution is 1/8 right here. So it's going to be a little bit faster than what we've listened to previously, but here is what the trance gate sounds like by itself, and I will solo the reverb. So very choppy. One strategy we could utilize potentially is to actually put this gate before the reverb in the inserts of this. And so in terms of signal flow, we would be allowing some of that dry signal through and then muting it, allowing it through, then muting it. And then that's what would go into the reverb. And so that could sound like this. So it's pumping, but it does sound really choppy. So let's bring it back after the reverb. And what I can do here is actually bring down the mix. So this dry wet mix effectively acts as a parallel processor. And so we can allow some of the full reverberant signal to pass through and then mix that with the purely gated reverb right here. And so bringing this down will make it not so choppy. There will always be some amount of reverb that is being let through. And that way we can get a nice sort of pumping. So let's have a listen starting at 100% wet. So we will start choppy and then I'll bring it down and try to get something that is nice and pumping. Let's bring the mix down. versus all the way dry. It's just the reverb straight. We can make it pump with a little bit of wet. Again, a little bit choppy. It wouldn't be my preferred method of getting pumping reverb, but I want to give you as many different options as possible just to get your mind working on how you can utilize pumping reverb in your music production. Lastly, in terms of the inserts here I have on this effects return channel is the LFO tool. This is one from Extra Records, and it's a great plugin if you don't want to go through the time and effort to actually set up sidechain compression, or if you want a really nice control over a tremolo that something like the stock tremolo inside Logic wouldn't allow. So right here is the rate of 1/4, and this curve right here is basically a repeating amplitude envelope that is being applied to the reverb after the reverb on this effects return channel. So we can start from all the way basically muted, go up again at a rate of 1/4 note, and then drop back down. And that's what this could sound like. Bring that reverb up. Make it less obvious by bringing the starting level up, the reverb back down. I love the LFO tool from Extra Records. I use it all the time when I need a more rhythmic style sidechain compression or pumping. I just find it easier to set up like that, although I do rely more on sidechain compression, just maybe not so much in a rhythmic sense. So that is the LFO tool. And before we go, I want to show you the last way of getting some pumping reverb. And to do that, I'm going to actually send this to bus 2, and bus 2 reverb right here. I will unmute, and you can see here that I have the little plate. This is an EMT 140 emulation from Soundtoys. Great sounding reverb. Just wanted to give a little bit of variety right here. And if I open up the automation lanes and go to volume, you can see that I actually automated the fader of the reverb right here. And so that is another way to get pumping reverb, by actually manually going through and automating the levels. You can get really granular and really specific with how you want the pumping to go. I simply just copied this sort of sawtooth style automation right here in Logic. But if you really wanted to go that route, you could do it that way as well. Here is what this could sound like. I'll bring up this gain, which I applied just because it was a little too loud without it, and I was already automating the fader. Maybe I could bring back the kick right here. Just really add some movement without. Let's go to the first reverb we had. So as I was saying earlier, it's a great way to get a little bit more dimensionality using reverb in general, but it's also a great way to get some more interest out of our instrument, in this case, the E-piano, and also some more rhythm out of the entirety of the mix. Now, this demo session is very sparse, so we can get away with a little bit more reverb without washing out the entirety of the mix. And before we get into the full session to have a look and listen at pumping reverb, I quickly want to encourage you to hit that like button if you're finding this video helpful thus far. It really helps out small channels like this one here on YouTube. I greatly appreciate that. All right, here we are inside the mix session for my song, The Reservation, off one of my albums called Fine Dining with an Octopus. And you can see here that I have the trusty Space Designer that we talked about, followed by the LFO tool, and that is on this sidechain verb is what I called it, but the pumping reverb effects return right here. You can see that they are the only two plugins on the inserts of this channel. And so what is feeding into this? Nothing else but this synth right here. You can see that it is being bused to bus 23. Bus 23 is the input right here. And so this synth by itself sounds very dry. The only other send I'm sending it to is the slapback delay. So I'm going to mute that for now just to show you what this sounds like by itself. There's a little bit of tape echo baked into the signal that you will hear, but it doesn't really add a whole lot of ambience and space to the sound. So here's the synth by itself. Here's it with the reverb. So So you hear that it really helps push things forward, add a little bit of rhythm. You see that the actual reverb setting here is huge. Now there is a lot of potential space between these hits, so we can really get away with it here. But in the context of the mix, remember, we don't want too much reverb because it will drown out a lot of the other instruments within the mix or the entirety of the mix itself. But I actually have this sidechain pumping reverb pretty hot in the mix, all things considered. Here is the mix with the sidechain reverb, and I will let it run through these 4 bars and then mute it so you can really hear the difference. I may even push it up a little bit louder in the mix if I don't find it too obvious. And without, a whole lot of dead space almost, it feels. I'll bring it back in. It almost helps that synth glide over top of the mix, and it also pulls us into the next beat here. That ba-wah, that helps lead into the second beat. Versus if I don't have it there, it sounds, especially compared to having it there, really empty, really dead. And with. And so that is one of the many ways that I would utilize pumping reverb inside a session. Again, I'm trying not to make these videos too long, so I'm not gonna show you a bunch of different examples here, but I hope that you got a lot out of this video and will utilize pumping reverb in your own productions. If you liked this technique and would like more music production techniques, I would highly encourage you to subscribe here to the Mining Microphone YouTube channel. If you have any questions or anything to add to the conversation here on pumping reverb, I would also encourage you to leave a comment in the comment section down below. I'll do my best to provide any insights I have to start a conversation here on this music production technique. And if you've made it this far, there should be a card in this end screen that will lead to another music production technique video that I think you'll really dig coming up next. So click on that one, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.